just mud, and you couldn't pull over 4 or 5 joints of that pipe on the wagon at a time. That's the reason it took so many of them.
That's very interesting. It seems to me like a lot of people are making a lot of money here. How did they spend their money?
Foolishly. A lot of them do. Well, I couldn't tell you about that. Mostly on cars, I think, and having a big time.
Mr. Combs, while we're still on the subject of the oil fields, I'd like to explain to me what you mean by a string of pipe.
Well, it's got threads on it, and you just have to screw it together and screw one joint and then go screw another on and you get to where you're going with it.
How much was the string? Enough to go from the top of the well to the bottom?
Yeah, that's right.
So it would depend on the well, how deep the well was,
Yeah.
how much of the pipe you'd need.
Yeah. Well, we didn't go clear to the bottom. We went to the top of the sand and then set the pipe on there, then shot the well, you see. The shooters would come out and they'd shoot the sand and then proceed to bring a well in.
Would you tell me what you mean by shooting and shooters?
Well, it's dynamite, and the certified that we used to use on them wells, and they'd run that in there and then dump it in the bottom of the hole, and then they'd have, some of them had time shots and some of them had batteries, you see, run wire down there. At first, they run wire down there to ignite that, set it off, see, and then they'd press a little button and it'd ignite and put the shot off. And then we'd have to clean out the hole. It'd take sometimes a month to clean out what had shot up down there.
Okay, since we've just about come to the end of this tape, we'll stop here and the person listening can turn the tape over.
Okay.
You were speaking about shooting off wells, and you made the statement that sometimes it took you a month to clean it up. Would you tell me what you mean by cleaning it up and how you went about doing it?
Well, they shoot the sand, you see, and the sand comes in the hole, and then you have to run a pump. It's just like a syringe pump down in the bottom of the hole and suck that up in there and then turn it out and dump it. Go back and get another and just keep on doing that all day long, 12 hours.
And you were pumping out sand.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Earlier in the tape, you also referred to bull wheels and band wheels. Since I didn't know what this was, I thought maybe you should explain this to us.
Well, a bull wheel is what you hoist the tools out with. See, you kick on rope, and then you pull them out with that, and then you throw them ropes off, and your band wheel is the one that runs all the time, you see. Great big one. It's 12 feet high.
These were on a drilling rig, and I was wondering what kind of motor run the tools and the rig.
Steam, all the time. We didn't know what motors was then. It was all steam everywhere you went. You could see them boilers every direction that you went, and hear them popping off, and the whistles all blowed when time to go to work and time to quit.
Maybe that's where the noon whistle that we hear now in big factories came from, the days of steam.
Well, it might be. They probably had them before we did. And we had a pop valve on the boiler, a safety valve, and steam would get so high that it'd pop off, you see, and release the pressure on it. And you hear them old boilers popping every direction you go. And we didn't have light plants then. We were drilled by gas torches. A piece of pipe stuck up, and then a tin can turned down over it. That was our light. So up till 22.
Now, I've seen them, but for our listeners, I can remember the pipe stood up usually taller than the head of a grown man, and gas came out that, and a can was put down over the top, and the gas was ignited, and this made kind of a torch-like flame.
That's right. And we'd usually have about about 5 or 6 of those up around the rig, you see.
And the gas came out of the well that you were drilling? You drilled down to...
No, not necessarily. It was out of other wells. It was coming from, some other wells that had already been drilled, you see.
Then they piped in water in those days, kind of like the rigs today pipe in. I mean, they piped in gas back then, like the rigs today will often pipe in water from another location.
Yeah, that's right. And we also started with oil. We got to run them oil burners in, what's called a jet burner, little jet, all that stuff.
Would you describe one of these jet burners and oil burners to me?
It's kind of hard to describe, but they sat in front of the boiler and went into the boiler, and it was just when this oil, it would jet it. It was pressure like this gas pressure here, and it jet it, and it ignite, and what is it? You'd have to light it, of course, start up with.
Now, oil ran through a jet, and you ignited the oil.
And then into the jet, and then into the boiler.
And so the boilers were fueled by oil, generally.
Some of them was. No, mostly when I first started in, it was all gas everywhere. We didn't even have oil. They never had got that mixture yet. But later they got the oil, and then they went to using oil burners where they couldn't get gas, was on Wildcat wells, which I worked on an awful lot, everywhere. And they had to use oil out there, and they'd bring it out in them big tanks and put it into a tank, and that's what we used for fuel.
Well, I wondered how they drilled, what kind of fuel they used to drill these wells with, because you had told me already that the pipe was brought in wagons. Were these wagons pulled by mule horses or what?
Big old draft horses. Just it was a pretty sight you ever seen to see a big string of them going down. They're just all cleaned up, and the harness were just upholstered all over them. And them teamsters were just as proud of them as I'd be of a new car.
Then that's where the Teamsters Union got their name. They don't use teams now, but I suppose because they did use teams early in moving things around, that's why they're called Teamsters.
Yeah, there's that Hayhouse had 38 them big draft horses teams, and that J.C. Wan, he had 60. His old dapple gray.
How many pulled each string of pipe or truck or rig of pipe, wagon load of pipe?
Well, there's just 2 horses on each wagon, you know. A lot of times they'd pulling boilers while they put 4 and 6 horses on them, and it depended on the roads and the weather. And I've seen them out boilers bogged down and laying off the side of the road. The wagon would just bog clear down and they couldn't pull it out. Had to dump the boiler off and go back and get it, drag it out there. And the prettiest sight I ever seen was that they had Drumright, and they had a loading contest. That's horses loading the boiler, and I don't know how many, if there was into this, but there was a lot of them. And they had horses, and they'd just unloose the double tree, and the horses would go right around by themselves. And they'd pull the chains over and put it around the boiler, flop it right up on there. Didn't have no skids or nothing. Just rolled it up on there with the chains and the power of the horses. And that was the prettiest sight I ever seen, I believe. But I always did like horses anyhow, and I guess that was one reason. Did you ever like horses?
Oh, yes. My son has a pony, and I do like horses, and I like to watch these on TV that pull the beer wagon and wonder if this isn't something like you're talking about.
That's the kind of horses that J.C. Swan had up there.
Was there, when they had these contests, these loading contests, was there much gambling and betting going on?
Oh, yes. Sure there was. Just like it is today, only a lot worse. I believe it was. And I seen one fellow that bet a guy that he had one horse that could load one of them big boilers. And I don't know how much is bet on it, but everybody's betting on it, except me. And so I didn't think a horse would do it. And he put that horse down, and that horse just almost laid down when he was pulling. Just kept it staying right there, and directly he started that boiler, and it went right up on there. That's the prettiest sight you ever seen.
Do you have any idea how much money someone might have won on a day like that?
Oh, money wasn't as plentiful as it is now, but I have an idea a lot of them won $1,000, $2,000. There's a lot of them old fellas that bet everything they had on them. And J.C. Swan, he's worth quite a bit of money and had all those teams, and G.A. Hayhouse was too. And them kind of fellas are the ones on the big betting. And the teamsters, of course, every one of them would bet. You couldn't find one of them that didn't think he had the best horse. So I had a lot of fun watching them, and sometimes I'd feel sorry for a horse. They'd choke down. See, this collar would choke them down. They'd just pull so long and hold last long. They'd choke down. And I'd like to see it all again, but not in that mud like it was up there.
Well, would you tell me if there was any union activities in those days in the oil field?
None whatever. I belonged to the first union that I knew of, and that was at Terry in 22. And the drillers and tool dressers wouldn't join the union because they're afraid to lose their job. And they just anybody talking union around, well, they just wouldn't listen to you.
What was the name of the union that you joined?
I don't know. That's a badge in yonder. Yes.
When the union wanted to come into the oil field and try to bring the people into the union, how did they go about it?
Well, they just went out and walked out through the country and contacted the men, and them drillers, they just get madder than an old wet hen at them. And they'd tell them, no, they didn't want belong to no union, they didn't need no union and all that stuff, and they just wouldn't do it.
How much were you making an hour at that time?
Well, as by the day then, see, when I joined that union, I guess I made $10 a day. And, of course, it went to going up, you see. And when I worked over at Terry, with Hennessy and Enid and around in there, well, I got $12 a day on that. And I worked 1 year and 4 months on one well without missing a day, 12 hours a day.
This is drilling?
Mm-hmm. For the Biographical bar, I can't really say it. And then when I came down here, well, I went in to see my old friend, Herb Schaefer. He was the general superintendent for the Pure Oil Company. And I went in there and to visit him a few minutes, and he talked me into notion to go to work for him. There wasn't no work then. And I thought he was kidding. I said, "Oh, you kidding?" "No, I ain't." And I'd worked for his dad, you see. So I went out here and then started to work on the reed lease. And I worked, 11 wells out there. And we got pretty well finished up with them, and Texas come along, and they wanted me, and I went down there for Texas Company.
Then you didn't lose your job for joining the union?
No. They threatened to run me off and all that stuff, but I didn't care. That's why I believed. I believed in 8 hours, and I believe in that people ought to have more, some kind of protection somewhere or another. And of course, I didn't think of retirement then. And so they said, "Oh, you're crazy. You never will play." I said, a lot of them said they worked for $5 a day up there in Pennsylvania and Ohio and West Virginia on them wells before they ever come down there, you see. I said, "I don't care what you do, I'm joining it." And I did.
In your opinion, were they helpful, and did they bring about changes that were good?
Not at that time, they didn't, because they couldn't get enough members to join it. There's some of them old drillers, I'd hate to say it, but it's what I thought. But a lot of them old drillers are hard-headed, you know. You couldn't convince them of nothing. There's everyone scared of the job. They're just afraid of the job. When they see a boss coming, they go to grabbing stuff and jumping around and just act like a bunch of monkeys.
Did you continue in the union till you finished your working year?
Well, when I went away from Perry, I never did hear of the union there anymore, that union. And they tried to organize up there at Perry, and them drillers just wouldn't talk to them. Or the rig builders or none of them. And two lessers, they all just wouldn't, no soap.
Now then, you were in Seminole and Drumright both when they were boom towns, and you've told me about the mud and the way the cars were backed up and how people spent their money. But what about the vice and corruption? Did you see prostitution and gambling and illegal moonshining and things like this?
It's all over Drumright and Shamrock in that Shamrock field, and then Cushing, and everywhere I've been, there was gambling. They even had a roulette wheel there in Drumright, dice table. You go down in that basement, you gamble. I never go down there, but there's a lot of them that did.
Now, it's okay to tell me because I won't tell anybody.
Huh?
It's okay to tell me if you did because I won't tell anybody.
I didn't go down there, sure enough. I didn't go. And then they had them at Arlington, and they finally run them out. No, I just didn't go there because I'd spend my time around the pool table. Now, that's my weakness, was the pool table. I'd get around one of them there, and of course I gambled on that. It's like,
how did you go about gambling at pool?
I just bet them that play for $1 a game and just start off.
And if you won the game, you got the $1?
Yep, that's it. And he paid for the game.
How much was the game?
10 cents. 10 cents for a rotation and all that stuff. And I'd go up there in the evening and spend the evening until time to go home.
Did you see girls brought in for the fellas?
What?
Girls? Did they bring girls into these towns for the fellas?
Yeah. Yeah, I seen they had a place out that they call the Hump.
Now, is that Hump like H-U-M-P?
Yeah, that's right. Out there at Drumright. And I'd hear them drillers and two lessers, they'd go out there. Of course, I was married and I didn't go no place like that. And they'd go out there and they'd tell about them naked women out there dancing on the pool table and all that stuff. And they'd give $50 to see them dance on it and all that stuff. But I never did go out there. I never was even in the place.
Did they sell liquor by the drink?
No, they just sold the half pint and pints and quarts and gallons. A lot of them. And then they finally got onto that that stuff to give them the Jake leg. What is it?
Is it moonshine?
No, it's I forget what it is now. Anyhow, down there at Bristol, when I was in that boom down there, well, you'd see them. So they had a place right out in the woods. They'd go out there on the creek and gather out there and build a little fire and canned heat. That's what I'm talking about. And they'd heat up that canned heat and get drunk and all logged up there, and just a whole bunch of them old thugs would go out there.
I wonder if the kids know about that today.
No, I don't think so. They don't know what canned heat is. And I never even tasted of it myself. I was all afraid of it because I've seen 2 or 3 fellas that had the Jake leg over it, you know.
What do you mean by Jake leg?
Well, they couldn't walk. They couldn't stand still, just like a duck, just that way. And my brother-in-law was one of them, too. And one of these main guys over here at Seminole had that, Kyle Knoll, and I knew him for ever since he was a kid. And so he got the Jake leg.
Why would they drink this? Was better liquor not available?
That's right. Couldn't get a hold of it, and then it's cheaper, and they just drink it. I sold, when I was selling roller products, I sold liniments for Indians for the drink in place of whiskey. Now, you think of liniment.
Mr. Combs, in these boom years, were you aware of any venereal diseases in the community?
Oh, yeah. Yes, everybody was. As far as that goes, and some of the people that's so filthy that run around there that did that, it was just, it was horrible to look at them. And so, there's a lot of them that got that venereal disease, too. I had 2 wrestlers down at Burnett, Texas, when that boomed down there. And so he had the syphilis, the bad, that he couldn't hardly go. And he was working right with me and didn't let me know anything about it. And as quick as I found out, I said, you'll just have to get your clothes and go on. And he said, well, he's trying to save up enough money to go to Hot Springs on. So I said, how much do you like? And he said, $50, and I'll just go to my check for $50. I said, go on and get it over with. Well, that fellow, I bet he wouldn't weigh 120 pounds. Great big fellow, too.
I guess in those days, if somebody went away for the cure, it was to cure venereal disease rather than to cure them from some dope that they're taking like people do today.
No, not that way, I don't think.
Was there a cure for it in those days?
No, there wasn't any dope around at that time.
Was there a cure for the venereal social diseases?
Yeah, in some cases it was. Now, like he had, I got a card in with this picture in there. So after he got down there to Hot Springs, just showed his head sticking up out of this tub. That's the last I ever heard of him. I don't know whether he died or not. But I'll tell you, his private just was a bit fall off nearly. Now, I'm telling you the truth. I looked and watched him, and it made me just plumb sick.
And there was no cure as far as you knew for someone in this stage?
No, they claimed that they could, that they could help them, but they couldn't cure them.
Was the subject discussed among just men only, or was it a subject that men and women might discuss?
Well, both ways. The men most always discussed it, but me and my wife, we have discussed that many times, and what venereal disease was, and the danger of it, and how to look out for it, and all that stuff.
Was there material available, films and books and things, and did people tell their children about it?
No, they didn't. They're just ignorant of it. They just passed it up. Just let the kids go on, just do like they wanted to do. And of course, the parents were an awful lot stricter on the kids than they are now. Awful lot. I was on mine. I know. I had certain times for them to get in, and they had to get in at that time. And the boys, the same way. I got 2 boys, 2 girls.
Okay, let's get from this to since you're talking about your children. In the boom towns, did you feel like your children got a good education?
No, I don't. Because not in the first of the boom, but on the last, we've seen that they did get an education. And all of them graduated from right down here from New Lama High School. And 2 of them went to college, and the other 2 didn't. This one, my daughter here, she didn't go any, and my youngest son didn't.
What kind of a qualification did a person have to teach school?
Well, I don't know what the qualifications was then. I think it was you didn't have to have a master's degree or a BS degree or anything like that. I think if you got out of high school, why, they'd consider you for a teacher if they needed one.
Okay. In the Boomtowns, did you have revival preachers and things like this come in?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we had them everywhere, but up there at Drumlight, there wasn't so many of them because the people wasn't, it was doggone busy, they didn't want to go, and they couldn't get no crowd. But you let a big show or circus come down, everybody was there.
Times haven't changed a great deal, probably. Here in Seminole, after you came back down here, were there churches and schools and things established by that time?
Yes, there was schools and churches here, but people didn't attend regular like they do now.
What year did you move back from Drumright to Seminole County?
I didn't do from Drumright. I come from Perry. Okay. I had moved from Drumright to Perry, and then down here. I come down here in 26, and I went to work, started work for the Pure here in 27.
I see. When you were drilling in the oil field, what kind of clothes did the driller and the tool dresser and the people who worked around the rigs wear? Did they wear hard hats and so forth?
No hard hats then when I first started then, but you just wore just common clothes you could get dirty and pull off, you see, like overalls and 2 or 3 pair of pants and a big pair of heavy underwear. And all you get on, then you're nearly freeze to death.
Did the owners of the rigs carry insurance to be sure that if you got hurt, you would be cared for?
None whatever. There's no insurance at all. I got my ankle broke in, 1924. But I was working for a company then, and they sent me into the hospital, and I come back out that night.
And work?
Yeah, went to work next 12 hours a day. On a big hole, too.
If you probably in those days there was 2 or 3 people ready to take your place in that job.
More than that. Well, an old driller told me one time I was aching about having to get out there and work in that kind of weather, and he says, "There's a lot of people that's living on a cracker there would be glad to have your job." And you just worked under a strain all the time when you first started. And then I was small, and I had to put out a lot of energy to hold the job with them big guys. They were all great, big, husky guys that they worked on the drilling rig. Because if they wasn't husky, they couldn't work on them.
Well, you're a pretty husky fellow yourself, so I can see why you could work on.
I was a 140-pound man when I started then.
You must have been a hard worker.
I worked too hard.
When we started this interview, Mr. Combs, and I'll tell you at this time how much I've enjoyed it and how pleased I am with it. It was when I first came to talk to you, it was in late October, nearly Halloween. Today, it's Friday, December the 8th, 1972, and we're making plans for the Christmas holidays. And I would like for you to tell me, back when you first came to Oklahoma as a boy of 13, what were your Christmases like?
Nothing. Just another day. We didn't hardly have anything at all. And it's so many of us kids are just lucky to have a little bit to eat and a place to sleep. So we didn't figure on Christmas at all.
You didn't believe in Santa then?
In what?
Santa Claus.
Well, I did in a way. Is what Mother and Dad would tell me. And so we didn't have no Christmas at all. So up till I went into the field.
Do you mean you never had a Christmas tree or gifts given on Christmas?
No, none.
Did you have a special food on that day?
Well, we'd all have a big old baked hen or a turkey or something like that. But that was a good Christmas for us.
Now then, after you were married, did you celebrate Christmas with trees or any way?
Oh yes, my wife, she had to have a tree, and she sent presents to all that she could, and cards to everybody, birthday cards, And she never forgot anybody's birthday. She got the book in there, it's still in there.
Well, did she make special preparations for the children's Christmas? Like, did she make them dolls and furniture and this sort of thing?
Yeah, always. And of course, we didn't have too much to make with, but we got by with it somewhere or another.
You made it a special day, even though you couldn't furnish
right.
the things you would have liked.
After I was married to Dad, and so we tried to make that a good day, you see.
Did you have special events in your community, like Christmas trees and this sort of thing?
No. Oh, once in a while, at the church, they'd have a big Christmas tree at the church, you see, or at the school, that big one, and everybody would bring a present there if they was able to, and for somebody special, and that's the way we'd go and meet them churches and have a Christmas there.
When you were a child, did your school put on a special Christmas program?
No, they didn't have no special. When I was a child growing up, going first started school, they didn't have nothing like that, and we just made it another day.
Okay, what about New Year's Day or New Year's Eve? Was it? Did you go to church, or did you go to a party, or how did you celebrate?
Well, that's kind of a funny question. I danced out the old year and in the new one, and that's the only time Roth ever went to dance with me. We went to one, and there's a bunch of them just got drunk in a boiled owl. I had a fight there, and she run out through the door and out through this and hollered at me, and so I took her home, and that was the last of that for her.
Okay, you said you started having a Christmas when you started working in oil fields. Would you tell me about those early Christmases?
Well, I don't recollect too much about them, but we never did have too much on the... We'd have some kind of a little old tree. We had to go out and cut one down, and just a few toys and candy and apples and stuff like that. But we tried to make a day out of it.
Were you required to work some days on Christmas in the oil fields?
Oh, yes. There's no special holiday on when you got through the well, when I first started then. And you didn't get paid till the well is completed. Don't matter if you starved to death, or it's your hard luck.
Well, if the well wasn't any good, if it was a dry hole, was there a chance you wouldn't get paid?
No, the contractor taking the contract from the company, and if it's a dry hole, it's on the company, and the contractor, he didn't have nothing to do with it then. When they finished up and they said it's enough, well, we packed up and went home.
Get your violin ready, Mr. Combs, because for the last part of this tape, I'd like for you to play me something on your violin.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Combs. I really appreciate getting to know you, and it's been a real pleasure to visit in your home. And this tape will be available for you to listen to at the Seminole Junior College if you should ever, or any of your family or your friends would like to hear you.
Well, thank you, Miss Morgan, for coming down and being here with me. And I hope I've told you about all that I know in the oil field, not all that I know, but I hope I've told you enough if you get the run of the oil field business, how it was in 1914 when I first started into the oil business, and especially on drilling wells with cable tools. And I thank you very much for being here.
School teacher of early days, Seminole County. When and where were you born?
I was born at Sugar Grove, Arkansas, November the 3rd, 1896.
When did you move to Oklahoma?
I came to Oklahoma in November of 1914.
Where did you move to?
I moved to Spalding, Oklahoma, which is 4 miles south of Holdenville. My older brother, Dr. D.W. Emerson, was superintendent of schools at Spalding at that time. He had visited our home in Arkansas and found out that I wished to attend high school. Since we had no high school at home or near my home that I could attend, he asked me to live with them and attend school at Spalding. So this caused me to come to Oklahoma. I sold my shotgun and hound dogs for $10. My father gave me $10. I boarded the train and headed for Spalding, Oklahoma. After arriving at Spalding, I picked cotton for a month to buy my clothes and books.
How long did you live at Spalding?
I lived there almost 1 year.
Why did you decide to become a teacher?
Well, my brother advised me that I would be able to pass the county examination and secure a certificate to teach at the end of the first year of high school. So I took the examination, secured a third grade certificate, applied for a school at a nearby community and was hired.
Where was it?
And it was at Greenleaf, a rural school about midway between Spalding and Secaucus.
Were you married at this time?
No, I was not. I boarded with a family by the name of Olivo, who lived about 2.5 miles from the building, school building. And I walked to school and back each day.
What was the school like?
Well, it was a typical 2-room rural school of that day, and the patrons of the community were principally farmers.
Okay. Well, I guess in the wintertime it got pretty cold for over there. How did you keep it warm, or did you have school?
Well, we had one of those old-fashioned wood-burning Franklin stoves or heaters in each room, and we burned wood that was cut and ricked on the schoolyard in these heaters. And on days when the weather was real bad, the attendance was small, and the children would gather around the stove, and most of the recitations occurred around the stove on that day.
Well, how many teachers were there?
We had 2 teachers, a principal and a primary teacher.
And what did you think?
Well, the first year I was there, I taught the primary.
I see. Is the school still there?
No, that school was consolidated with Spalding School something like 50 years ago.
What kind of transportation did you have back then?
Well, I didn't own any type of transportation. I would ride with some neighbor to town on Saturday and buy our groceries and other necessities.
How did you get your mail? Did they have a mail carrier back then?
We had a rural mail carrier in those days, and he delivered the mail each day to the mailbox near our home.
I see. Where was your nearest doctor?
The nearest doctor in our community was at the Software. And in order to get his services, someone had to ride a horseback to the Software and notify him that his services were needed. And then you had to wait about an hour after he was notified for him to arrive.
Where did most of your staples and essentials come from?
Well, they came from some of them from the farmers of the community who bought vegetables from them in the summertime. And during the year, you purchased others at the Software or Holdenville.
I understand that you were living in Greenleaf during the Green Corn Rebellion. What do you remember about it?
Well, I was teaching my second term of school at Greenleaf when this occurred. I had taught 1 year between my 2 years at Greenleaf over at Leader near Allen. But in the spring of 1917, I married my boyhood sweetheart at Sugar Grove, Arkansas, and we moved to Greenleaf, where I was to teach the coming year. And the Green Corn Rebellion occurred during the early part of this summer term. And it's known as the Green Corn Rebellion because those involved stole roasting ears from farmers' cornfields and roasted them during an encampment along Little River at the time or just before the rebellion took place. This Green Corn Rebellion occurred in the southern part of Seminole and Hughes County. Some of it along the Little River area is organized in Seminole and Hughes County by a few labor leaders of this area for the purpose of resisting the draft law passed by Congress following our declaration of war on Germany in April 1917. According to the reports in the newspapers, the chief organizers and agitators were Homer Spence of the Tate community and Will Benefiel of the Lone Dove community. They operated through two labor organizations known as the Working Class Union and the Industrial Workers of the World. These organizations were frequently referred to as the WCU and the IWW. These men worked underground, organizing and recruiting followers for more than 3 months before the rebellion opened. They held secret meetings in the schoolhouses in the Tate community, Lone Dove community, Friendship community, Rocky Point community, and Cully community, as well as some others. In these meetings, reasons for resisting the draft were outlined by the leaders. The chief sales pitch was, it's a rich man's war, and that we plan to join 1 million more men who are ready to march on Washington. These leaders succeeded in recruiting more than 300 men as members of their organization. And they planned to force all the farmers to join in the near future. That is, all the farmers in Seminole and Hughes County. The officers of Seminole and Hughes County began to hear rumors that trouble was brewing near Seminole. So the Seminole County Sheriff, Frank Gall, and his deputy, Bill Cross, decided to go down and investigate. They didn't know that the members of the rebel organization had been instructed to carry arms at all times and shoot any man with a white shirt on. While they were gone, the report came to Wewoka that the 2 officers had been killed southwest of Spalding. However, this report proved to be false. Late in the afternoon, Sheriff Gall and his deputy, Bill Cross, returned to Wewoka with a report that they had been fired upon from ambush, and that one buckshot had hit Deputy Sheriff Bill Cross in the neck. Later they found out why this false report on their death was circulated. The rebel leaders were so certain that their plot to ambush the sheriff and his deputy would succeed that they reported the death at Holdenville 2 hours before ambush took place. Now that the first shot of the revolution had been fired, the leaders saw that their plans of sabotage must be executed at once. These plans call for the use of matches to burn bridges, dynamite to blow up Texas pipelines, looting of the stores in Secaucus to secure arms, ammunition, and food, and the cutting of telephone and telegraph lines, and also placing poison in the wells of their enemies. The rebels succeeded in burning 2 or more railroad bridges and cutting telephone and telegraph lines, but their plans of destruction were soon interrupted. The battle cry had been heard not only in Wewoken, but in Holdenville, Ada, McAllister, Oklahoma City, Oak Mulligan, Henrietta, and Okemah. Officers were sent to Seminole and Hughes County in a very short time. As soon as the reports came to Holdenville on August 3rd, that a large number of outlaws had gathered near Little River Bottom in Secaucus, near the Hughes County line. Posses were organized to put down the rebellion. A special train with officers came from Holdenville by train to help with the manhunt. Secaucus was the center of organized posse resistance. The officers at Secaucus were headed by the sheriff from Pontotoc County, Bob Duncan. Frank Gall was accompanied by officers from Oklahoma City and Shawnee in making a raid on the protesters. On Saturday morning, Sheriff Gall led 100 men in a posse that advanced on the Lone Dove group that had been organized and headed by John Spear. There were 125 rebels and 125 others stationed on a high hill and had pledged to fight to death. When they saw the posse coming, Spear said to his men, "Boys, I'm sick. I've got to go home. Run and huddle." The only order given the rebels that was obeyed was given by a Negro in the group, who said, "Run, you SOBs, run." and they really did run. The officers spent the next 2 days rounding up scattered rabble. They found that hot air was poor protection against high-powered rifles. It took several days to round up the remnant of the scattered group. Another group, headed by Will Benefield, had gathered and butchered a yearling and were eating roast beef in the hot August sun when the officers appeared to capture them. And one of the men was heard to say, just before the officers arrived, that Uncle Sam was not running this government any longer. We were running. But when the officers appeared with their guns, they ran like rabbits. And some of them were caught by the officers, and a few escaped for a short time. 2 or 3 nights later, the leader of this group, Will Benefield, was captured while walking across the railroad bridge at Calvin, Oklahoma. I recall that my wife and I were living in a small building owned by A.C. White, who was director of our school board. And witnessed one incident that occurred during this rebellion. One morning, Mr. White appeared at our house and told Mrs. Emerson that they were planning to build a porch on the east side of the house, and that a Mr. Walker was coming to help with the work. And a few minutes after his arrival, Mr. White asked Mrs. Emerson if he could hide a .38 pistol that he was carrying somewhere in the house. He said something unusual may happen here today, so I brought my gun along. Mrs. Emerson told him that he could hide it under the cover on the bed, and this he did. In a short time, W.W. Walker, who was clerk of the school board, arrived, and he and Mr. White proceeded to work on the structure of the porch until about 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Their work was interrupted. 4 officers from Holdenville arrived in a Model T Ford carrying guns. They drove up to the house and stated that they were looking for Mr. W. Walker. Mr. Walker identified himself, and when he did, the officer told him that he was under arrest. And it'd be necessary for him to accompany them to hold him there. Mr. Walker laid down his tools and got in the car and left with the men. This is the last time I saw the clerk of my school board. And because of his being arrested and placed in jail, it's necessary for me to wait for my paycheck until a new clerk can be appointed by the county superintendent to assume the duties of clerk of my school board. It took some time to round up all the men who had participated in this Greenhorn Rebellion. The jails at Ada, Rewolka, Holdenville were all filled, and the overflow was taken to McAllister. In a short time, preliminary hearings were held at McAllister and Holdenville by the U.S. Commissioner, and 190 were bound over to stand trial in the federal court, some at Ardmore and some at Muskogee. At the hearing in Ardmore, held on November the 1st, 1917, the Ardmore paper stated that 62 of the insurrectionists pled guilty. 21 were acquitted the first week of the court. The leaders were among those entering pleas of guilty. They were given uh, 10 years, sentenced to Leavenworth prison. The trial was conducted by the federal judge Ralph E. Campbell.